Well, good morning once again, and today our task is to continue our discussion from last week, where we were in the middle of discussing the generations, or rather the degeneration of the generations of man. I will, of course, review in short points what it is that we did last time. We discussed the poet Hesiod and his work, the didactic epic Works and Days, from which we saw and read the story of Pandora. And we defined it as an etiological myth, that is, a myth whose purpose is to explain why a certain thing is the way it is. In the case of the story of Pandora, why is it that life is hard and that humanity should undergo trials and tribulations and experience difficulties, illness, and so on and so forth? Well, we saw that in fact was an act of revenge by Zeus on both Prometheus and those whom Prometheus loved best, we mortals. Prometheus's punishment, we mentioned, was to be chained to a rock in the end of the earth, that is the Caucasus range of mountains, and the punishment to men was the gift, so-called the gift of Pandora, given to Prometheus's brother Epimetheus. Now, we explained the meaning of the names Prometheus, forethought, and Epimetheus, afterthought, a quality which made it impossible for him, that is, for Epimetheus, not to receive the gift from Zeus, even though he had been warned by Prometheus not to take anything given to him by Zeus or Zeus's emissaries, Hephaestus, Hermes, who actually delivered Pandora. And so Pandora, that was made in the image of the goddesses and received gifts and superb qualities from the gods. We saw that Hephaestus made her in the image of the goddesses, very attractive in form, and the graces, the Charites, those goddesses who are the attendants of Aphrodite, shed grace and beauty and charm upon her, and Athena taught her all the arts and skills that a good maiden should be well versed in. And that is how Pandora was a work of art in every sense, given also a jar. Yes, we said not a box or a chest, but a jar, pithos in Greek, in which were contained all the ills, troubles, misfortunes that are with us still, seeing as Pandora, upon being given to Epimetheus, opened the lid or raised the lid of the jar, and all the ills and misfortunes came out and spread in the world. All, that is, except of hope or anticipation, as we have it in the translation that we were reading, that was still left inside because Pandora closed the lid before it managed, that is, before hope managed to escape. Hence, we think that hope is invisible. It is not with us. We cannot see, we cannot foretell, we cannot anticipate exactly what will happen. And so we try always to hope for the best. And that is the reason for why human life is the way it is. It is an etiological story. Now, this story being concluded, we moved on to another account of why life is as it is, and why it is that we experience difficulties and so on and so forth. And we came to the myth of the races of man, or the ages of man, which is a myth, a story quite independent of the story of Pandora. It has no relation to it whatsoever, and a completely different story. And we saw that that story expresses the sense of what we call the fin de siècle. You remember that expression, fin de siècle? That is the end of a century, or the end of the century. To begin with, that term was used specifically of the end of the 19th century to express a certain sense of decadence and a feeling that everything that the world has to offer has already been used, and there is nothing new to experience, a sense of fatigue and tiredness. But it has been taken to refer to any such sensation or feeling that arises when we look upon the past with yearning, saying that, well, now at the beginning of this century, or the beginning of a new age or a new generation, the old generations seem better, somewhat magical, somewhat paradisiacal, and people living then must have enjoyed a better quality of life. Life was more peaceful, calmer, more serene, sensations that reside with us still, especially in this age when technology has changed nearly everything that we know, and our course of life has been radically changed, say, compared to, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. Life is really not to be recognized in so short a span of time. So this sensation, this atmosphere imbues the story of the ages of man. We begin with the paradisiacal existence in the golden age, when there was no war, no strife, most importantly, no work and toil. And people lived happily, the weather was fine, the earth brought forth food, nourishment was abundant, no shortages of any kind. This generation we saw was ended, to be replaced by an inferior generation, the Silver Age, in which, again, life was still far better than it is now, but the population of the Silver Age began to sin, as it were, against the gods, because they did not perform the sacrifices that are required by the gods, and for that reason, Zeus destroyed them. We also saw, by the way, that the first generation, the Golden Age, was created not by the more familiar Olympian gods, Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, and so on and so forth, but by the Titans, the first generation, the older gods. Hesiod does not specify that, but we are made to understand that, seeing as the second generation is after the fall, as it were, after the war between the Titans and the younger gods, which was, of course, a war which was, of course, won by Zeus and his associates. And that also brought, as it were, a cosmic deterioration, degeneration of morals. And mind you, the degeneration of the ages is always moral. It is the moral degeneration that brings about the hardships and the illnesses and the misfortunes that we are all witnessing around us. Moral degeneration. So the Silver Age also came to an end, to be replaced by the Bronze Age. Now, the Bronze Age was much more violent, prone to war, which was unknown up to that time. And Hesiod is very concise in his description of the Bronze Age, saying a few things about it. Let's see exactly his words, which of course we have already read. Yes, a third one of bronze, not similar to the silver one at all. Out of ash trees, terrible and strong they were, and they cared only for the painful works of Ares and for acts of violence. They did not eat bread, but had a strong-hearted spirit of adamant. Unapproachable they were. Upon their massive limbs grew great strength, and untouchable hands out of their shoulders. Naturally, their weapons were of bronze. Bronze were their houses. With bronze they worked. There was not any black iron. And these, overpowered by one another's hands, went down nameless into the dank house of chilly Hades. So no positive description of the netherworld here, the dank house of chilly Hades. That is where you go once you die. Black death seized them, frightful though they were, and they left behind the bright light of the sun. So these, the Bronze generation men, quit the world without any remuneration, as it were, unlike the Golden Age that were transformed into guardian angels on the earth or above the earth, and the Silver Age generation, those who belong to that generation were made the guardian spirits of the world below. So the Bronze Age, these just vanished. Black death seized them. And this is where we stopped. Now we will continue with a digression, an excursus, the Latin word is, a digression, which Hesiod employs. We would naturally expect another degradation, right? From bronze straight into iron. But no, there is a digression, and Hesiod describes the fourth generation as not belonging to any metal. It is the generation of heroes. Yes, slowly and securely it will reveal itself to us. So, yes, a miracle indeed. Let's see. This is the silver generation. Yes, we've read that. And yes. Good. So again, the Silver Age and the Bronze. Slowly we reach the heroes. When the earth covered up this race too, Zeus, Kronos' son, made another one in turn upon the bounteous earth, a fourth one, now in complete contrast to the gradual degradation that we saw from gold to silver to bronze. We have a generation that is more just and superior, the godly race of men heroes who are called demigods, the generation before our own upon the boundless earth. So again, you will notice the epic characteristics of epithets. Zeus, Kronos' son, the earth is not just an earth, but is a bounteous earth, an adjective that repeats itself, okay? Many times in Hesiod, the earth can be bounteous and it can also be boundless, but it is never just an earth. Why? Because I remind you that Hesiod was heir to the same oral tradition in which Homer composed, and it is quite obvious that he too composed his poems orally, at least to begin with, and they were committed to writing at a later stage. Now, the Age of Heroes, why does he need that generation? Also, in order to account for that mythical generation that many Greeks saw themselves as descendants of that generation. Okay, you would see genealogies that go back to mythical characters such as Heracles, the descendants of Heracles, who lived in the Peloponnese. Historical Greeks saw themselves as descendants of Heracles and other heroes, Achilles and Agamemnon and Jason and Medea. All these mythical characters belong in the Age of Heroes. So to explain their mythical presence, Hesiod inserts this generation among the series of generations just before the Iron Age, which is the generation of contemporary Greece, or at least the Greece of Hesiod's days. And also, I remind you that Hesiod was not the inventor of this story. Neither was he the inventor of the story of Pandora and Prometheus. He was the recipient of a tradition that was common in the Greek world. It was he who first committed it, I won't say to writing, but to poetical form that lasted and survived the ages, the millennia. But he was not the inventor of this tale. It is, however, his version. And this will become clearer as we progress in our material today. We will see another version of this story. So, in fact, the Age of Heroes explains the existence of the heroes that fought at Troy and in another legendary war, the war of Thebes, the Theban war. Evil war and dread battle destroyed these. Some under seven-gated Thebes in the land of Cadmus, while they fought for the sake of Oedipus' sheep, Others brought in boats over the great gulf of the sea to Troy for the sake of fair-haired Helen. There the end of death shrouded some of them. So the fate of the heroes, the demigods, that is part human and part divine in terms of ancestry, heroes like Achilles, like Aeneas, and others. So they were not immortal nor immune to the injuries of war. No, they died, and died cruel and violent deaths, as we saw in the Iliad. But those of them who survived, see what lay in store for them. So if you were lucky enough to survive these horrible wars, upon others, Zeus the father, Cronos son, again, it is always Zeus the father, Cronos son, even though it has just been said, Zeus, Cronos son, again, the reason is that it completes the hexameter line perfectly. So we need that epithet in order to maintain the meter. Bestowed life and habitations far from human beings, and settled them at the limits of the earth. So, first of all, you will recall when we were discussing the heroes of the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the heroes, in fact, now we know of the heroic age, we said that these were men greater than we, superior to us. And I always give the example of Diomedes lifting up a rock. No 5 mortal men who live today could lift it, but he did it alone. The same is said of Hector, of course, of other great heroes. And this, of course, is to explain how they were great and so on and so forth. And they were demigods. And those of them who survived were taken up, as it were, by Zeus and given life and habitations far from human beings. So for all we know, they may still be there, far from us, at the end of the earth. Settle them, where do they reside? At the limits of the earth. And these dwell with a spirit free of care on the islands of the blessed. Now, the islands of the blessed are again not to be located. I do not know where they are. I don't suppose that anyone else has that much desired information. But there, if you are blessed enough to reach these isles, you will be living in the conditions of the golden age. This was the gift. This was the reward given by Zeus to those heroes who survived. Now, of course, we know that this does not square with stories that we know, say, of Menelaus, who survived the Trojan War, of Odysseus and other heroes. And why? Because we know that the war ended and Menelaus and Helen returned back to Sparta in the Peloponnese. So here we are told that those who survived were taken by Zeus and given residence on the Isles of the Blessed. Well, not all myths square, one with the other. And so we may at times want to find an order or an ordered continuation and continuity from one myth to the next, but alas, it cannot be found. There are some contradictions, many contradictions, in fact, in the myths themselves, and we should aspire to treat every myth as a separate work, a separate tradition, as it were. So according to this tradition, the survivors of the Trojan and Theban wars were whisked away and given residence on the islands of the blessed, beside deep eddying ocean. Now, ocean is not the ocean that we think of. Needless to say, the name comes from this god, but no, ocean was the river that was thought to encircle all land masses of the earth. We will see that also today when we discuss the structure of the earth and how it was created. Ocean is a river from which, of course, all other rivers emanate and penetrate into the lands, wherever they are. So it is there that the islands of the blessed are located. And there that the generation of heroes, the survivors of that generation, live in happiness without care. That is what is most important. There is no care in the Isles of the Blessed. That is why they are so called. Happy heroes for whom the grain-giving field bears honey-sweet fruit, flourishing 3 times a year. So, again, this lack of need to cultivate the soil, the earth will produce the crops for you, and you need do nothing. That perhaps is the greatest mark of the Golden Age, which we can also see in the story of the Garden of Eden. I don't think that you had to toil so much to eat bread. You had all the fruits of the garden at your disposal to eat and enjoy, except, of course, the tree of life and death and the tree of knowledge, good and evil. So we were to be kept ignorant and happy, but we all of us know we did not desire that. We wanted knowledge. We were tempted to select knowledge. Perhaps it would have been better to be ignorant and have food supplied to us. Who knows? Maybe just wishful thinking, but that was the most prominent mark of the Golden Age. And now, that age being gone, meaning the heroic age, now we come to the great dichotomy that is between the ideal existence in the Golden Age. We saw the gradual degradation and degeneration, and we come to the worst of the ages, the age of iron. And Hesiod begins with a wish, an unreal wish for the present. If only then I did not have to live among the fifth men. Okay, there is a textual problem here that the translator discusses. We will not go into that. The text moves on to the description of the Iron Age. And Hesiod wishes that he did not live among the Iron Age, but could have either died first or been born, just a second, afterwards. For now, the race is indeed of iron, and they will not cease from toil and distress by day, nor from being worn out by suffering at night, and the gods will give them grievous cares. So this is our existence. This is present day, or Hesiod's Greece, which we can, of course, apply to our own times. And of course, you can see we do not cease from toil and distress. That is to explain why we need to work, because there was a moral degeneration. So, yet all the same, for these people too, good things will be mingled with evil ones. So we all know that life is not all bad. Hesiod yet prophesies that it will be worse in future, but now there is bad, but there's also good. And he says that things will be mingled, good things will be mingled with evil ones. Now, there is a reference in the Iliad, in the last book of the Iliad, book 24, to Zeus and the two jars that he has on the floor of his palace on Mount Olympus, two jars that are filled to the brim with all that is good and all that is ill. And Zeus takes from both good and ill and gives to us mortals our lot. For some it is divided equally, for others unequally, but this is to explain why, again, we have both good and bad in our lives. So when Hesiod says here that good things will be mingled with evil ones, it is perhaps reminiscent of the two jars of Zeus, from which he scoops up our shares of good and evil. But Zeus will destroy this race of speech-endowed human beings too. Okay, so there's going to be an end to us Iron Age generation. When will that come? When at their birth, the hair on their temples will be quite gray. So in fact, it is the almost opposite, if you will remember, of the silver generation, when people were born, babies, and had a very, very prolonged infancy, 100 years of childhood. So in the yet to come worse future, there's going to be a reversal of that. People will be born old. So at their birth, the hair on their temples will be quite gray. Father will not be like-minded with sons, nor sons at all. So in the future that is yet to come, and who knows, this was written or composed, to be more accurate, in the 8th century BC. Reason has it that that distant future is now maybe our present, because you will see that many of his predictions are our reality. Like father will not be like-minded with sons, that is family disputes. Fathers not agreeing with their sons, nor sons at all, that is that the sons will not be like-minded with their fathers. Nor guest with host. Again, you will remember, of course, the most important principle of xenia, of hospitality. So we saw how shocked and terrified Odysseus was to see that Polyphemus disdained hospitality. This is going to be a matter of routine. Guest with host will not be like-minded, nor comrade with comrade, nor will the brother be dear as he once was. So there's not going to be any camaraderie, no fellowship among men, nor brotherly love, Philadelphia in Greek. So no brotherly love, as was wont to be. They will dishonor their aging parents at once. This, again, a mark of moral degeneration, deterioration, no respect to, no reverence to your parents, especially in their old age. They will reproach them, addressing them with grievous words. Who would dare speak grievously to their parents? The Iron Age generation yet to come will. Cruel men who do not know the God's retribution, nor will they, now this is one of my favorite verses, nor will they repay their aged parents for their rearing, nor would they repay their aged parents for their rearing. Udemen hoige gerantesitokeusin apothrepteria doien. That's the Greek hexameter. Now, the Greek word here is threpteria. This is a word non-extant in any modern language, well, so far as I know. It is the reward, the actual physical, monetary, economical reward that children are obligated to offer their old parents for all that these parents had given them as part of their upbringing. All those extracurricular school activities, private lessons, food, shelter that we were given by our parents, we, according to ancient Greek standards, need to be not only grateful for all of that, but we need to take an active part in reimbursing, rewarding our parents for all of that by actually giving them money, attending to their needs. And that is what Hesiod means by saying, repay their aged parents for their rearing. You were reared and cared for by your parents. You now need to return the favor and rear your aged parents, or rather nurse your aged parents, whatever the cost and with all the inconvenience that it might cause you. Still, that is what is just, measure for measure. So no care for that in the Iron Age. Their hands will be their justice, and one man will destroy the other's city, nor will there be any grace for the man who keeps his oath. So what we would regard as, the most logical course of action, this is an honest person who speaks the truth, who stands by their oath. They will receive no grace, no respect, nor for the just man or the good one, who will receive favor, who will get all the material reward. They will give more honor to the doer of evil and the outrage man. So the more outrageous you are, the more loud speaking, deceitful, and false, the better will be your fortune in this degenerated world. Justice will be in their hands. So the more powerful you are, the more just you are. And reverence will not exist, but the bad man will harm the superior one, speaking with crooked discourses, and he will swear an oath upon them. So even though he will be lying, falsifying the truth, still saying it loud enough and speaking crookedly, and swearing a false oath upon his falsehood, this will grant him honor. And now, and envy, evil-sounding, gloating, loathsome-faced, will accompany all wretched human beings. So envy, the green-eyed monster, I believe Shakespeare called her, will be ubiquitous, that is everywhere. Envy you see with a capital E. Why? Because I remind you, in Greek mythology, we are very fond of abstract concepts being made concrete. That is the personification of abstract qualities. Envy is not just a quality or a feeling or something that is innate within us. No, it is a goddess per se. There is a goddess envy, zelos in Greek, the personification of envy. She or it will be everywhere. And of course, envy does not go without an epithet, not one, but several. Evil sounding, gloating, loathsome face. So envy is ugly. It has a loathsome face. It is gloating. You know, when you envy someone and they fall, you gloat. Very clear mark of envy. And evil sounding, naturally, because you will say evil things about the object of your envy. This will accompany all wretched human beings. Then indeed will reverence and indignation cover their beautiful skin and with white mantles, leave human beings behind and go from the broad-pathed earth to the race of the immortals, to Olympus. So again, you will see reverence and indignation. Again, this is the choice of words made by the translator. Reverence stands for the Greek eidos, which is shame. Shame in the sense of modesty, shyness, reticence, delicacy, not in the sense of doing shameful acts. No, shame, eidos, meaning reverence also. When you revere someone, you treat them with respect, you belittle yourself in their presence. So this, again, is a personification of that quality, an abstract deity, reverence, eidos, and indignation. Well, it is often also translated as retribution, just retribution. Eidos, nemesis, of course. What else but nemesis? So just retribution. These will, by that time, have given up hope. They will have despaired from humanity and will have decided to leave us to our woes, because what will they do? Mind you, we are made to understand that reverence, shame, and indignation, retribution was still among us in these direful times. But seeing as the situation was so bad, so grievous, they too decide to quit the earth, to cover their beautiful skin with white mantles, and they will leave us, human beings, behind and go from the broad-pathed earth to the race of the immortals, to Olympus. And so, just a second, baleful pains will be left for mortal human beings, and there will be no safeguard against evil. Thus, we come to the end, the grim end of the story of the generations. Again, a story meant to make us understand why it is that we experience all these difficulties in our lives, and how it is that once upon a time we were in paradise and that we had a better existence. Now, the story as such inspired many a poet and many a writer throughout antiquity. This is the earliest version that we have. And I promised you last time a biblical parallel to this story, and now is the time to mention it before we move on to yet another version. And I am speaking about the book of Daniel. I had forgotten how fine the print is. Hope I will be able to read it. Yes. So it is the book of Daniel of all books. And there we have King Nebuchadnezzar at the beginning of the 6th century BC, dreaming a dream. And in his odd cruelty, he tests his soothsayers, telling them, tell me what it is that I dreamed and interpret the dream. So they first have to say to Nebuchadnezzar what it was that he dreamed. He had forgotten perhaps. And then they also have to interpret that dream. They, of course, all fail until Daniel, good old Daniel, comes and says, you, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Well, he goes on to say a few more things, concluding, this is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. So, you, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. So the realm, the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar is likened to the head of that miraculous image that he saw in his dream. It is the kingdom of gold. Everything is good. And then, as you can assume, the metallic degeneration reflects the degeneration of the kingdoms yet to come. So again, and it is to end, of course, there's a stone that is cut and destroys the image, so the end is not going to be good. But this story, dream, myth, whatever you choose to call it, clearly reflects a similar approach of degeneration compared and likened to the diminishing quality of metals, from gold to iron, and here we have an added degeneration because we have 2 feet, one of iron and one of clay, which is a very base material. Good. So if you're curious, you can continue reading this for yourselves. It is Daniel chapter 2, beginning at verse 36 onwards. You can also consult modern interpretations and see what they say of this dream, prophecy, and prediction. We will now turn to something less holy, and that is our beloved poet Ovid, whom we already know. We've read his imaginary epistle written by Penelope to the tardy Ulysses, and now we will discuss his most famous poem, the Metamorphoses. Now, this is not going to be a discussion of the Metamorphoses as a whole work, but rather just of the opening lines. Why? Because they reflect and they continue that same tradition that we saw in Hesiod. And always remember, it is as though the time gap between Hesiod and Ovid is just like the time that has elapsed since, I don't know, the birth of Maimonides and we. So it's 700 plus years. Ovid was born in Italy, in the town of Sulmo, which is 90 miles north of Rome, in the year 43 BC, the 20th of March to be precise, almost a year to the day, almost a year and 5 days after the most famous of assassinations, that of Julius Caesar, the Ides of March, that is March 1544 BC. So Ovid was born exactly a year later. He received fine education at Rome. He was destined to become an orator, or at least that is what his father wanted him to be. But Ovid himself says that, well, whatever I wanted to say came out as verse. I wanted to speak normally. I wanted to write prose, but the verses came of themselves. He was a poet to begin with. The talent was innate. And so he turned to poetry, much to the displeasure of his father, who, Ovid tells us, said that even Homer, the greatest of all poets, who were, are, and will be, even he was poor. So poetry is not a source of income for an aspiring young Roman. So, but nevertheless, Ovid took that path and was acquainted with the greatest poets of his day, such as Propertius, Tibullus, and of course the great Virgil and Horace. Knew them and their works, and continued in his own idiosyncratic way of composing poetry. He had an astonishing output. Nearly all the works of Virgil, Horace, Lucretius, Propertius, Tibullus combined do not amount in number of lines to the work of Ovid. Now, in Ovid's case, it is not that quantity outshone quality. No, he is one of the greatest Latin poets of all time, belonging to what we now call the golden age of Latin literature, the Augustan age, which quite ironically also brought about his demise, because Ovid was first and foremost a love poet. He was master of the love elegy. We saw all the letters of the heroines are love letters, desperate love letters of mythological heroines to their absent dear ones, beloved ones. And he was the absolute master of that. His first poetic work was called the Amoris. Okay, Amoris, love poems, in 2 books, short love elegies, and that was followed by the so-called didactic poem called Ars Amatoria. Okay, the Ars Amatoria, which even if you do not know Latin, you will be able to translate as the art of love, the Ars Amatoria, in 3 books. Now, this is maybe a mock didactic epic. Why? First of all, it is written in elegiac couplets. We already know that meter, a line of hexameter followed by a line of pentameter, the meter of elegy, mainly concerned with love and the more intimate emotions, unlike epic, which is heroic and if didactic, then it is used to expound great subjects such as why life is hard, how people have come down to their unfortunate present, and so on and so forth, or the poem of Lucretius on the nature of the universe, a great didactic poem. No, Ovid is going to instruct us on how to love properly, how to find a spouse. If you're a girl or if you're a man, how to find a spouse. So there are many, many memorable lines from this rather long poem. It's in three books, The Art of Love, saying that the girls go to the center of town, as it were, to the games, both to see and to be seen. So if you want to find a girlfriend, go to where all the action is. And really a splendid, splendid poem, which, as I said, was going to cause Ovid quite a lot of trouble. Why? Because in the year 8 AD, Augustus being Princeps, that is sole ruler of the Roman Empire, Ovid was exiled far, far away from Rome into a forsaken spot on the northwestern shore of the Black Sea, a Greek colony called Tomis. It is in present-day Romania, where 10 years later he died. He was exiled to that faraway, God-forsaken place. Why? We do not know. Ovid himself, who gives us many details about his biography, says that it was due to Carmen et Error, that is a poem and a mistake. Now, the poem most likely is this, the Ars Amatoria, which scholars claim festered long in Augustus's heart, as it was opposed in principle to those qualities which he wanted, Augustus wanted, to prevail among Romans. That is, the old Roman qualities of austerity, chastity, and in general, good and well-mannered behavior, not what Ovid recommended in the Ars Amatoria, which of course was done partly in jest, but it is believed that Augustus did not look upon that with a kind eye. So that was the Carmen. What was the error? We do not know. What mistake could Ovid have performed that so angered Augustus that he took that advantage and got his revenge on Ovid, both for the Ars Amatoria, the composition of the Ars Amatoria, and that particular mistake, that particular error that Ovid made. We do not know what it was. Perhaps it was something related to Augustus' family, because Ovid himself was of a not a senatorial family, but he was of equestrian stock, that is a high-class Roman, and he was in the circle of Virgil and Horace, so he was close to the court, the imperial court, and maybe he witnessed or heard something that he should not have witnessed or heard, and Augustus wanted him removed as far as possible from Rome, and that is why he was exiled to Tomis. There he was bereft, he was deprived of all that he cared for most, that is the culture of Rome, the libraries, the knowledge, the literary circles, all denied him. But luckily for us, by the year 8 AD, when he was exiled, he had completed at least a first draft of the Metamorphoses, an epic poem that contains 15 books of hexameter verse, having as its main theme the subject of metamorphosis, that is the change of forms. It in fact encompasses some 250 myths, most of them from Greek origin, that involve, in one way or another, a change of form. Books 1 to 13 are all concerned with Greek themes, whereas 14 and 15 are in fact concerned with Roman mythology and history. And again, Ovid was successful at maintaining that leitmotif of metamorphosis throughout all these tales. Now, what is unique about the Metamorphoses is that it is not your, I should say it, everyday epic poem. It is long by all standards. It is narrative. It does describe the acts of gods, demigods, and mortals. It does describe heroes, but it is not an epic poem in the form of the Iliad or the Odyssey. It doesn't have a single character or a few characters that are there throughout the poem. No, the Metamorphoses is in fact a long series of what we would call, the singular is epilion. Okay, an epilion, as the name maybe suggests, is a diminutive form of epos, that is an epic poem. So if an epos is what we see in the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, an epilion is a work that retains much of the characteristics of the epos. That is, it is narrative, it is concerned with heroes and heroines. There are gods and goddesses and demigods in it, but it is on a much smaller scale. The word, in fact, is mentioned but once in what we would call ancient writings. It is mentioned by the writer Athenaeus, who lived in the 2nd or the beginning of the 3rd century. He mentions it as a small-scale epic poem, but it was since then forgotten and was never used by any of the ancient literary critics. It was revived by a German scholar whose name escapes me in the 19th century. Who was it? Perhaps Wolf. I don't remember precisely. For our purposes, it doesn't really matter, but it was revived in the 19th century. to describe exactly that. Those works that were written in hexameter verse, but were on a much smaller scale. They were very common in the Hellenistic period. Perhaps the most famous, the best known example of an epilion is that by the poet Catullus, the Roman poet Catullus, poem number 64 in the collection of poems that we have from Catullus, known for its subject, the marriage of Peleus and Fetus, when in fact the main story in the marriage of Peleus and Thetis is not the marriage itself, but what? The description of the bed covering, of the covering of their nuptial bed, their wedding bed. They have a wedding bed and it has a very fine covering on which is embroidered the tragic, sad story of Ariadne, abandoned by her beloved Theseus on the island Naxos. So Catullus describes this piece of cloth, this bed covering. This, by the way, is called an ekphrasis. Ekphrasis is a description in literature of a work of art. What is perhaps the most famous ekphrasis of all? The description of the shield of Achilles in book 18 of the Iliad. You see, whatever we do, we always find ourselves relying on the Iliad. So in book 18, Hephaestus forges new armor for Achilles, and a special description is there of the working, the forging of the shield, describing all the embellishments that Hephaestus made on it in great detail. That is called an ekphrasis. So Catullus did the same thing, describing the embroidery of the bed covering. That is the story of Ariadne and Theseus. And that is an epilion, because poem 64 of Catullus is what? 400 plus lines. It is by all standards not an epic poem. It is an epilion, a short epic. And now this brings us back to the Metamorphoses. The Metamorphoses, in fact, is a series of epilia. Now, the plural of epilion would be epilia, because it is a Greek word which retains its Greek plural. So we have epilion in the singular and epilia in the plural. And the Metamorphosis is just that. It is an epic poem, in that, a true epic poem in terms of its sheer size and length, but not in terms of its plot, its narrative plot, because the plot is so versatile, so diverse. I just told you, 200 more or less different myths who all share in the leitmotif of Metamorphosis, but the stories as such are different. They're not the same. They are, each of them, an epilion. And taken together, the Metamorphoses is a series of epilia. And like all good epics, it begins with what? A proem, in which also is included the invocation, usually of the muse, but not necessarily. It is usually of the goddess of song, the muse. It can be an invocation of Apollo, the lord of the muses. Here the invocation is to the gods, whoever they might be. And Ovid begins, My intention is to tell of bodies changed to different forms. The gods who made these changes will help me, or so I hope, with a poem that runs from the world's beginning to our own days. Now, the translation that I am here using, and the one that I sent you, is a translation by Rolf Humphries, an old translation, very free translation, but done very sensibly, and of course retaining all the good qualities of the original. It is in English verse, containing perhaps 10 syllables per line, not a hexameter, of course, but in the original, we have hexameter and something that I take for granted, but we've discussed mainly Greek epics up to now. This was originally written in Latin, which also uses the Greek meter, the hexameter. So what does he say? Now, the Latin is a bit more elaborate. The translator here, and throughout his translation, has omitted certain words and phrases, but again, the message comes across. The beginning in Latin is in nova fert animus mutatas dicere formas corpora. This means, roughly, my mind carries me to speak of forms that have changed themselves into new bodies. My intention is to tell of bodies changed to different forms, as the translation says. Di coitis nam vos mutastis et illas ad spirate meis, primaque ab origine mundi, ad mea perpetuum deducite tempora carmen. Which means gods, because you have made these changes of forms, inspire my undertaking. Okay, so be good enough to give me inspiration, inspire my undertaking, and lead my song continuously from the first origin of the world to our own times. So Ovid's task is very, very ambitious. He wants to speak of the first great metamorphosis, or perhaps the greatest metamorphosis of them all, the creation of the world. So from that far away and mist-enshrouded beginning to our own days, it is the entire history of the world. And he addresses the gods, seeking their inspiration. Why? Because it is they who instigated all those metamorphoses, all those changes of form. So this is my intention, and I am invoking you, the gods, to help me with a poem that runs from the world's beginning to our own days. Now, this version that I sent you is accompanied by a short commentary, which I also included in the material, that aims to explain certain concepts in the translation. But the creation as such is very ordered, and it sometimes reminds us of a modern scientific account, claiming that all matter was in some sort of chaos and a great mélange of opposites, hot and cold and wet and dry, and They were all inextricably mingled until what? Some god or other made them or infused them with order. But these, by the Creator's order, held no general dominion. Okay? So, just a second. No, this is the line, excuse me. Till God or kindlier nature. So see the reservation here. First of all, he says everything was in a state of chaos. It's a very nice poetic description there. He says, heat fought with cold, wet fought with dry, the hard fought with the soft, things having weight contended with weightless things. So it's a very, very beautiful description of what chaos is. Everything fights with everything. Opposites are inextricably intermingled. Until God or kindlier nature. So this is very advanced and avant-garde, I would say, for Ovid's times. Because first of all, he says God, not gods. So there is some divinity that transcends the regular Greco-Roman pantheon. And it is not that Ovid has all of a sudden become monotheistic. No, he is perhaps echoing the Stoic philosophical doctrine, which saw the world as existing under providence, some divine rational power. We can call it God, we can call it nature, cosmos, Zeus, the governing principle. It has many manifestations and many forms to describe it, but that is God. And this is what he says, God or kindlier nature. Perhaps it would be wise to see what it says in Latin. Hanc Deus et melior litem natura diremit. Yes, so this God and a better nature or a kindlier nature. So God and kindlier nature put an end to this strife, that is the strife of chaos. So here comes God or nature in the Stoic definition of it, and settled all argument and separated. And now we begin to have order, heaven from earth, water from land, our air from the high stratosphere. So notice the scientific approach here that differentiates between kinds of air. There is our air, which currently is more of a smog, but it is a baser form of air from the high stratosphere, what the ancients called ether. That is the divine air, or sometimes fire even, that is high above us. A liberation, so things evolved, and out of blind confusion found each its place, bound in eternal order. And so the elements find their places according to their quality. The lighter or lightest of them all, the force of fire, that weightless element, leaped up and claimed the highest place in heaven. Below it air, under them earth, sank with its grosser portions, and the water, lowest of all, held in the land. So the first phase of creation is cosmos out of chaos, cosmos meaning the order of things, very important principle in Greek thought, standing in stark opposition to chaos, of course, which is the lack of order. And we have the earth, as it were, ordered in layers. The heaviest element, maybe water, upon it earth, upon it air, and high above the celestial fire. This, again, is now taking a different shape of concentric spheres, because then Ovid imagines the earth as a sphere, or rather concentric spheres with the earth and water in the middle. This is encircled by air, which in turn is encircled by ether. And again, he says, whatever God it was, who out of chaos brought order to the universe and gave it division, subdivision, he molded earth in the beginning into a great globe, even on every side, and bade the waters to spread and rise under the rushing winds surrounding the earth. And so we have in the middle the earth as a globe, and then it is surrounded by water. It's a very evocative description and very detailed, describing all constituents of creation. Also, the division of the earth, which is very, again, it's not just nice and good literature, it's also correct scientifically, at least as science was perceived in the latter half of the 1st century AD, describing the earth as divided into 5 zones, which we still adopt today. That is the equatorial, okay, the torrid zone, too hot for men to live in, the north and south, too cold, but in the middle, varying climate, temperature and season. That is the tropical region. So we have the torrid zone, which is the equatorial zone, where it is presumably too hot to live. Then we have the north and south poles, too cold. The polar caps, we cannot live there. Where can we live? In between the equator and the polar caps. Now, as far as they were concerned, people lived in the northern hemisphere. What was going on in the south was unknown, but there were conjectures that there were people living opposite ourselves, as though walking on their heads, or we, what? Exactly, the antipodes, the antipodes, those who live across from us or opposite from us in the other hemisphere. So everything is created, including climate, varying climate, temperature and season. Above all things, the air, lighter than the earth, and so on and so forth. So everything is created, except what? The animals, the fish, the birds, shining fish were given the waves for dwelling, and beasts, the earth, and birds, the moving air. What is missing? Just like in the biblical story of creation, man is created last. Something else was needed, a finer being, more capable of mind, a sage, a ruler. So man was born. It may be in God's image. We, again, like to think of ourselves as undoubtedly created in the image of God. In whose other image can we be created? But even 400 or so years before Ovid, the poet, philosopher Xenophanes famously said that if horses and lions could speak and write, then they would say that the gods look like horses and lions. So just because we can speak and write, we imagine the gods to be anthropomorphic. And we, of course, created in their image. So what is noteworthy in Ovid's account is that it is reserved. It is not a certainty. Man was born, it may be in God's image, or earth perhaps, so newly separated from the old fire of heaven, still retained some seed of the celestial force which fashioned gods out of living clay and running water. So again, the translation here is omissive, because in the original, we also have mention of Prometheus, saying that maybe one of the gods created man in his image. Or another assumption, another conjecture or possibility is that Prometheus, why Prometheus of all? Because he is traditionally regarded as a philanthropos, a lover of man. So naturally, there is also a myth claiming that he created us. How? From the earth. But why are we so divinely gifted? Well, the explanation here is that this is all newly made. The earth had just separated from the heavens, right? So maybe the earth, that pristine earth, that earth of long ago, still contained and retained some of the heavenly elements in it. And we, being fashioned from that early earth, still have within us that divine spark, that divine quality, and therefore we are in a certain way created in God's image. You know, there is a famous fable about Prometheus and the creation of man, that all creation was there, created by Zeus and the other gods, and then Zeus saw Prometheus just loitering to no good purpose on Olympus, and he commanded him to fill the earth with life. So Prometheus, again, the earth was prepared. There were no animals in it yet. So Prometheus was commanded to fill the earth with life. So he created the animals, all the beasts, the fish, and so on and so forth, and finally man. And later on in the evening, when Zeus came and saw that man was greatly outnumbered by the other creatures, he told Prometheus to make things right and to restore balance to creation. So Prometheus, instead of creating more real men, simply transformed some of the beasts and changed their form into men. And that also is a kind of etiological story whose purpose is to explain why there are some people who, though they look like men, people, still retain a beastly character. So again, variant of the creation story, but to conclude that, so whatever our origin is, we came to be. What is without any doubt is that all other animals look downward. Man alone, erect, can raise his face toward heaven. So this is a marvelous couple of hexameter lines. And again, it is greatly infused with Stoic thought. Yes. So, caelumque videre iusit, et erectos ad sidera tolere vultus. That is, the Creator commanded man to watch the skies, watch the heavens, and with his face erect, that is standing upright, look at the stars, examine the stars. Now, this is the reason why we have upright posture, so that we do not concern ourselves with earthly matters, but rather are able to look up and examine the heavens. That is also expressed by the Stoic philosopher Seneca, that great man of letters of Nero's time, in his work On Leisure, De Otio. What shall we do in our free time, in our leisure? Well, we were made, custom made to inspect the heavens. Why? Because our neck can traverse the whole 180 degrees of the celestial vault, and we can watch the stars from their rising all across the vault of heaven until they set. That was no accident. We were made to examine the lofty matters and the stars. Okay, so in this sublime atmosphere, we will end. Of course, we did not finish our discussion of Ovid, which will be continued in our next session, The 4 Ages of Man, which is to be compared with Hesiod's 5 ages. And then, according to our syllabus, we will move on to an entirely different subject, history and Herodotus. Great, so that will be all for now, and I will see you all next week. Yes.